Deep inside a quiet cave in northern Spain, archaeologists found a small engraved stone that should have been easy to ignore. It was not a monument, not a treasure, not a written document. But across its worn surface were strange lines bending, branching, and gathering like rivers, paths, and hidden valleys. Some researchers believe it may preserve one of the oldest known attempts to map a real landscape, carved more than 13,000 years ago by people living near the end of the Ice Age. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of ancient history and mystery you enjoy, because this stone may not just show a place, it may show how prehistoric humans remembered their world. The stone waits in darkness long before anyone understands what it might be. It lies among the traces of a vanished world, inside a cave in the hills of northern Spain, where the air is cool, the limestone holds its silence, and the ground remembers footsteps that stopped coming thousands of years ago. At first, there is nothing grand about it, no towering monument, no painted chamber filled with charging animals, no buried palace, no golden mask staring back from the earth. It is only a small engraved block worn by time, scarred by human hands, easy to overlook beside sharper tools and more obvious remains. Yet on its surface, beneath the damage and age, there are lines that refuse to behave like idle scratches. They twist, branch, bend, and gather with a strange sense of order, as though someone once tried to trap a landscape inside stone. The place is a bounce cave, set in the Navarre region of Spain, not far from valleys, ridges, streams, and old routes through the western Pyrenees. Today, the surrounding world carries roads, farms, modern villages, and names layered by centuries of language. But when the object is made, the world is different. The Ice Age is not yet a distant memory. Cold still presses into Europe. Glaciers have retreated from their greatest reach, but the land remains unstable, raw, and difficult. Forests are returning in some places, open grasslands still stretch in others, and animals move through corridors that human groups know with the intimacy of hunger. This is a world without written signs, without drawn borders, without cities, without permanent maps hanging on walls. And yet, what survives in the record suggests that people already carry landscapes in their minds with remarkable precision. The mystery begins quietly because archaeology often does. A thing is lifted from the soil, cleaned, catalogued, compared, and only slowly becomes impossible to ignore. The engraved block from a bounce does not announce itself as a map. It does not present a neat north arrow or a scale. It does not separate river from mountain with the tidy confidence of modern cartography. Instead, it offers a puzzle of incisions made by people who lived around 13,000 to 14,000 years ago. Near the end of the Upper Paleolithic, some marks appear to show animals, others may show routes, watercourses, and topographic features. Scholars still debate how far the interpretation can go, because the evidence remains incomplete, and prehistoric images rarely explain themselves. But the possibility is startling enough this may be one of the oldest known attempts to represent a real landscape, not merely as art, but as space that could be remembered, crossed, hunted, and shared. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Because the story of this stone is not just about a strange object found in a cave. It is about the moment when the deep past suddenly looks closer than expected. It is about realizing that people often imagined as primitive were reading terrain, planning movement, and perhaps compressing the shape of their world into symbolic form long before farming, kings, writing, or monuments. The stone forces a quiet adjustment in the way the prehistoric mind is imagined. It suggests not a world of random wandering, but one of remembered valleys, seasonal decisions, dangerous crossings, and knowledge passed carefully between human beings. Inside the cave, that possibility changes the atmosphere. The darkness no longer feels empty. It becomes a place where decisions may have been made. A band of hunter-gatherers enters after a day of movement through cold air. Their clothing is stitched from hides and sinew. Their tools are bone, antler, flint, wood, and fibre. Smoke gathers near the roof. Firelight moves across stone walls and across the faces of people who know that survival depends not only on strength or luck, but on memory. They must remember where animals pass when the season turns. They must remember which slopes hold snow too long, which stream can be crossed safely, which ridges expose travellers to wind, which sheltered hollow might hold fuel, and which valley may lead toward herds. In such a world, a map is not a luxury. A map, even if it is only partly a map, is a way of holding survival outside the body. That is what makes the bounce object so unsettling. Modern people are used to thinking of maps as products of measurement, empire, trade, administration, and writing. Maps belong to sailors, surveyors, tax collectors, armies, and states. But the human need to map is older than all of those things. It begins whenever a person must say, without saying in words that survive, that this place is connected to that place, that a river bends here, that the past lies beyond the ridge, that the animals come through this corridor, that danger waits in one direction and opportunity in another. The engraved stone may not be a map in the modern sense, and no responsible interpretation should force it into one. But if the proposed reading is correct, even in part, then it belongs to a much older tradition of spatial thought, one that existed before writing, and perhaps before anyone would have separated art, memory, story, and instruction into different categories. The marks themselves are the beginning of the trouble. On a simple decorated object, lines may be counted, grouped, admired, or interpreted as symbols. On this stone, however, some researchers have argued that the lines correspond to features around the cave rivers, mountains, paths, and locations meaningful to late Paleolithic hunters. There are animal figures associated with the engraving, and there are markings that seem less like decoration than arrangement. The possible map is not a clean aerial view. It may be a mixture of perspective, memory, and symbolic emphasis. Important places may be enlarged. Routes may matter more than exact distances. Water may be shown because water guides movement. Mountains may be shown not as geological forms but as barriers, lookouts, or anchors in the mind. No single explanation fully accounts for this, which is why the object remains so fascinating. It sits between categories. There is a temptation, with any prehistoric mystery, to make it larger than the evidence allows. That temptation should be resisted. The stone does not prove that Ice Age people made maps in the modern cartographic sense. It does not prove a lost civilization, an unknown science, or some vanished system of written geography. Those claims belong to the louder edge of imagination, not to the careful ground of archaeology. What it does suggest is more subtle, and in many ways more powerful. It suggests that people at the end of the Ice Age may have represented familiar terrain through engraved signs, linking animals, movement, and landscape in a portable or remembered object. That is enough. It is more than enough. A small stone from a cave becomes a window into how deeply prehistoric people knew their world. And perhaps the greatest shock is not that such a thing could exist, but that it was unexpected. For a long time, the deep past was treated as a place where human thought was simple, unless proven otherwise. Tools were practical, art was symbolic, survival was immediate. But finds like this disturb those neat divisions. The people of Abonts were not standing at the edge of humanity, waiting for history to begin. They were already fully human. carrying mental worlds as complex as the terrain around them. They could remember, plan, compare, teach, and perhaps mark stone with information that outlasted them by thousands of years. So the story begins with a cave, a block, and a series of lines. Nothing about it is easy. The object is damaged. The interpretation is contested. The landscape has changed. The people who made it left no explanation, no voice, no written key. Yet the silence is not empty. It is filled with the possibility that someone once looked out from a cold, Paleolithic world, saw rivers, slopes, animals, and paths, and understood that a landscape could be held in the mind, then pressed into stone, the map. If that is what it is, does not merely show a place, it shows a way of seeing, and that way of seeing is where the mystery truly begins. The world around a bounce begins to loosen before it becomes gentle. Ice withdraws from its old authority, but it does not leave Europe in one clean retreat. It pulses, hesitates, returns in bitter intervals, and leaves behind a landscape where every season tests memory. Around 13,000 to 14,000 years ago, the people who passed through the valleys of what is now northern Spain lived near the end of the Magdalenian period, a time famous for cave art, worked bone tools, portable engravings, and a hunter's attention to animals. Yet for them, nothing feels like an ending. There is only weather, hunger, movement, and the difficult reading of signs in earth, snow, wind, and animal behaviour. The land is not the Spain of vineyards, roads, and warm stone villages. It is a colder country, full of contrasts. Open spaces stretch between patches of woodland, river valleys cut through limestone and folded hills. The Pyrenees rise as a presence of snow, rock, and changing roots. In winter, the air hardens the ground. In spring, thaw water swells streams and turns paths into mud. In summer, the same valley that seemed dead under cold light becomes busy with insects, birds, grazing herds, and human attention. The evidence remains incomplete, because no excavation can recover every campsite, every vanished trail, or every decision made beside a dying fire. But what survives in the record suggests a world where survival depends on knowing change before it arrives. For late Magdalenian groups, movement is not wandering. It is seasonal strategy, shaped by animal migrations, toolstone sources, shelter, water, and the memory of earlier journeys. Herds matter because they are food, clothing, sinew, bone, antler, fat, and time. A single animal can become meat, hide, thread, tool material, and grease for light. Red deer, ibex, horses, bison, and other animals occupy the mental landscape as much as the physical one. Their paths are watched and remembered. A ridge is not only a ridge if animals cross it in autumn. A river bend is not only a river bend if tracks gather there after thaw. A slope is not just stone and grass if it offers a place to wait unseen. This is why the possibility of a prehistoric map belongs so naturally to this world. A map does not need to begin as a scholar's diagram. It can begin as a memory problem. How does a person hold the shape of a valley when the valley is not in sight? How does a group teach a younger hunter where the animals pass, where the water forks, or where the dangerous climb begins? Spoken knowledge can do much, and gesture can do more. A hand moving through the air can trace a river. A finger in ash can sketch a bend. A line scratched into bone or stone can hold a pattern longer than the breath that explains it. Scholars still debate whether the abeyance engravings serve that kind of role, but the need for spatial memory is not difficult to imagine. At the end of the Ice Age, the land is changing quickly by prehistoric standards, but slowly by human experience. A child may hear elders speak of places where herds used to gather more reliably, or snow used to last longer, or a route once safe became harder after floods shifted gravel and banks. Climate is not an abstract force here. It is a change in the taste of water, the thickness of hides, the timing of flowers, the silence of a valley where animals no longer appear. Ice farther north is shrinking. Sea levels are beginning their long rise and ecosystems are rearranging themselves. The people of Abounce do not know this as climate history. They know it as uncertainty underfoot. The Magdalenian world is also a world of astonishing craft. Flint blades are struck with practiced skill. Bone needles show that clothing is not crude wrapping but tailored protection. Harpoons, points, ornaments, and engraved objects reveal hands trained by repetition and minds alert to form. A decorated object can carry an animal, a memory, a mark of identity, or something that does not fit any modern category. One lesser-known truth of Paleolithic life is that some of its most intimate evidence is small enough to be held pierced teeth, shaped antler, engraved plaquettes, smoothed tools, and bits of pigment. Abounce Cave is not isolated from the world outside. It is tied to it by roots, seasons, and return. A cave can be shelter, lookout, workshop, storage place, gathering point, or landmark. It may be used intensely for a short time, abandoned, revisited, remembered, or forgotten for generations. Smoke stains, broken bones, stone flakes, hearth remains, and lost objects accumulate slowly. What looks to modern eyes like a site is, to the people who use it, one point in a larger web of movement. The cave matters because it belongs to a landscape of decisions. That landscape is full of risk. A wrong turn can cost energy that cannot be spared. A missed herd can mean hunger. A flooded crossing can separate people from shelter. A snowstorm can erase tracks and landmarks. The cold does not need to be dramatic to be deadly. It only needs to be persistent. Yet people endure because they are knowledgeable, social, observant, and inventive. They know plants that burn well and bones that can be split for marrow. They know where flint can be found and how long a blade can be used before it must be replaced. The engraved stone, imagined inside this world, becomes less surprising and more extraordinary at the same time. Less surprising because people who live by landscape must think spatially. More extraordinary because stone preserves only the thinnest edge of that thinking. For every mark that survives, countless maps, vanished lines traced in mud, gestures made over embers, stories told beside river noise, routes taught by walking them again and again. If Abounce preserves even one fragment of that lost tradition, then it offers something rare, not merely evidence that people were present, but a hint of how they organized the world they moved through. And as the ice loosens its grip, that organization matters more than ever. The old certainties are shifting, animals adjust their ranges, vegetation changes the openness of valleys, rivers alter their banks. Human groups must adapt without ever standing outside history to see the whole pattern. Somewhere within that changing world, someone takes a surface and cuts lines into it. Whether those lines record a river system, a hunting plan, a remembered territory, or a mixture of all three, they belong to a time when landscape is not background. It is the main condition of life. The mystery of the map begins there, in a world thawing unevenly, where to know the land is to remain alive. Before the engraved block becomes a problem for modern archaeology, before its lines are traced under careful light and compared with valleys beyond the cave mouth, it belongs to a far older rhythm of use, abandonment, and return. Abounce is not simply a hole in stone. It is a point of shelter in a living landscape, a place where the outside world narrows into darkness and the human world gathers around flame. The cave does not need to be permanently occupied to matter. For hunter-gatherers moving through late Paleolithic terrain, a shelter can be important precisely because it waits along a route, known by memory, useful at certain times, avoided at others, and entered when weather, animals, or travel make it necessary. Imagine the approach before the land has its modern names. The hillside rises under cold air, vegetation shifts with season-low shrubs, grasses, scattered trees, tough plants clinging to thin soils, damp growth near water. The entrance is not grand in the way painted caves are often imagined. It is practical first. It offers a break from wind, a darker pocket in the rock, a place where sound changes and bodies can gather. A person coming toward it reads more than the opening itself. They read tracks in soft ground, broken twigs, the angle of light, the smell of damp limestone, the possibility of animals having used the same shelter. Caves are not automatically safe. They must be checked, known, and made human again. Inside, the world contracts. The weather is still present at the mouth, but deeper in, the cave holds its own coolness. Fire transforms it. A hearth does not merely give warmth, it creates a centre. Around it, stone tools are repaired, hides are scraped, bones are cracked, points are sharpened, and food is shared. Smoke lifts and stains the ceiling. Shadows move across uneven walls. Faces appear and disappear in the glow. A child, if present, learns by watching hands rather than by formal lesson. An older hunter may examine a broken point. Someone works a needle through hide with a concentration as precise as a knee later craftsperson. Someone else watches the entrance, where the outside light slowly fades. This is the cave before discovery, not silent, not empty, not a museum of objects waiting to be classified, but a place of breath, work, fatigue, and memory. The archaeological record preserves fragments of that life unevenly. Stone flakes remain because stone is stubborn. Bone survives when conditions allow it. Charcoal can hold the ghost of a fire. Pigment may cling where it was dropped or rubbed. But the softest and most ordinary things vanish almost completely. Woven fibres, bags, wooden shafts, bedding, bindings, gestures, songs, warnings, jokes, grief. The evidence remains incomplete, and because of that, every reconstruction must stay careful. Still, what survives in the record suggests that such caves were not lifeless backdrops. They were working spaces, social spaces, and memory spaces. A bounce would have been part of a wider pattern of movement. People may not come every year in the same way. Some visits may be brief, a night of shelter, a small fire, a few tools resharpened, bones left behind. Other visits may last longer, with more activity accumulating on the floor. The cave's meaning can change over generations. One group knows it as a hunting stop. Another uses it as a place to process carcasses. Another returns because elders remember water nearby or a route through the hills. In such a world, places are not fixed by written ownership but by use, knowledge, story, and repeated presence. A cave becomes familiar because bodies return to it. The engraved block may have been made in this kind of setting, or brought here after being marked elsewhere. No one can say with certainty exactly what moment produced it. That uncertainty matters. The stone could have been handled beside a fire, carried for some distance, discarded after use, placed intentionally, or left among other debris when people moved on. Its survival does not reveal its full biography, yet even the possibility that it belonged to everyday life changes how it feels. It may not have been a sacred treasure hidden away from touch. It may have been something used, seen, discussed, or understood by people who did not separate practical knowledge from symbolic expression in the way modern observers often do. One surprising detail about Paleolithic portable objects is how intimate they can be. Wall art feels distant because it belongs to chambers and surfaces larger than the body. Portable art sits closer to the hand. It can be turned, carried, warmed by touch, damaged, forgotten, recovered. An engraved stone is not only an image, it is an object with weight. Its maker has to choose a surface, angle a tool, apply pressure, follow or resist the grain, and decide where one line should meet another. If the Abance engraving does represent landscape, even partly, then the act of carving may have been a form of remembering through the body. The hand moves as the mind moves through terrain. Around the cave, the landscape supplies the content of thought. Rivers, slopes, animal routes, and distant ridges are not abstract geography. They are the framework of daily survival. A hunter entering a bounce after crossing wet ground may still carry the sound of water in his ears. A group returning from higher terrain may bring news of snow, tracks, or empty valleys. Someone may describe where animals were seen, how far they moved, and which route was passable. In the absence of writing, such information lives in speech, demonstration, repetition, and shared attention. A line on stone could serve many purposes at once: reminder, teaching aid, story surface, planning tool, or symbolic anchor. The cave itself helps preserve this mental world in fragments. Its darkness slows decay. Its sediments bury what people leave. Layer by layer, accidental archive forms beneath ordinary acts. A flint chip drops from a toolmaker's hand. A bone is tossed aside after marrow is taken. A burnt patch marks where warmth once gathered. The engraved block enters this accumulating record, though no one at the time thinks of it as evidence. No one carves for future archaeologists. No one imagines a distant age in which researchers will lean over the stone and debate whether its lines describe the land outside. The people who use the cave live forward, not backward. Their concerns are immediate, though their traces become ancient. And so a bounce before discovery is a place between worlds. Outside, cold hills and valleys demand movement. Inside, firelight gathers knowledge into a human circle. The cave protects, but it also records. It receives scraps of meals, broken tools, marks on stone, and the nearly invisible remains of decisions. Much later, when the engraved block is found, it will seem mysterious because its makers are gone and its code is incomplete. But in its own time, it may have been far less mysterious. It may have belonged to the practical intelligence of people who knew the terrain with their feet, their eyes, and their hunger. The cave keeps only the object. The living landscape that gave it meaning has to be patiently imagined back into place. At some point, the stone stops being merely an object and becomes a question. That change does not happen all at once. Archaeology often advances through slow discomfort, through the feeling that a familiar explanation no longer fits as neatly as it should. At first, the engraved surface can be treated as decoration, because decoration is a safe category. Paleolithic people engraved animals, signs, repeated marks, lines, and shapes on bone, antler, stone, and cave walls. Some images are instantly recognizable, others remain stubbornly uncertain. A cluster of cuts on a small block might belong to that broad world of symbolic marking, meaningful to its makers but closed to everyone else. Yet the longer the lines on the Abance stone are studied, the more they seem to resist being dismissed as random ornament. The difficulty begins with organization. Random scratches can overlap without pattern. Decoration can follow rhythm, symmetry, or visual pleasure. But on this stone, some markings appear to do something more spatial. They bend and branch in ways that invite comparison with landforms. They seem to relate to one another rather than float independently. Certain incisions have been interpreted as watercourses, routes, or features of terrain. Animal figures and other marks complicate the surface, turning it into something that may combine movement, hunting knowledge, and remembered geography. Scholars still debate the interpretation, and the debate matters because the stone sits at the boundary between image and information. If it is only decoration, it is still valuable. If it is landscape, it becomes astonishing. To read such a surface is not like reading a modern map. Modern eyes are trained by printed lines, satellite views, road diagrams, contour maps, and screens that flatten the world from above. A Paleolithic engraving, if it represents terrain at all, may do so through a very different logic. It may show what matters rather than what measures correctly. It may bend space according to memory, danger, and usefulness. A river could be shown because it guides the body through the land. A mountain could be shown because it blocks passage or marks direction. A route could be compressed, enlarged, or simplified. The map would not need to satisfy modern geometry to serve prehistoric understanding. This is one of the quieter surprises of the object. The marks do not need to be perfect to be purposeful. A person who knows a landscape does not always need exact proportion. A few lines can awaken a whole territory in memory. Even today, someone can draw a crude sketch on a napkin and convey where a road bends, where a bridge crosses, where a path disappears behind trees. The drawing may be inaccurate by surveyor standards and still completely useful. Something similar may be happening here. Though the evidence remains incomplete, the stone may not be a full map in the later sense. It may be a memory device, a route sketch, a hunting diagram, or a symbolic landscape where animals and terrain belong together. The act of recognizing possible order in the lines requires patience. Researchers must separate natural cracks from human incisions, later damage from original marks, deeper cuts from lighter scratches. They must examine direction, pressure, overlap, and placement. A line made deliberately by a tool has a different character from a fracture caused by time, though the difference is not always obvious after thousands of years. Some marks may have been made in a single episode. Others may have been added later. Some may belong to the same composition. Others may not. No single explanation fully accounts for every mark, which is why certainty remains out of reach. But uncertainty does not erase pattern. It only forces the interpretation to move carefully. The more closely the stone is considered, the less passive it becomes. It suggests a hand moving with intention. That hand may have followed an image already held in the mind, the bend of a stream, the relation between a cave and a valley, the direction of a pass, the place where animals appear. The surface becomes a meeting point between memory and material. Stone is unforgiving. Unlike sand or ash, it does not allow easy correction. A carved line commits the hand to a path. If the engraver is representing landscape, even loosely, then each cut is a decision about what deserves to last. The possibility that the engraving contains mapped information also changes the status of Paleolithic art. For a long time, prehistoric images were often divided into categories that made sense to modern scholars: art, ritual, decoration, counting, notation, hunting magic, identity, territory. But the people who made them may not have separated these meanings so cleanly. A carved animal could be beautiful, useful, symbolic, remembered, and practical all at once. A line could be a river, a route, a boundary of experience, or part of a story. What survives in the record suggests that Upper Paleolithic communities were capable of layered expression. Their marks could hold more than one kind of meaning without becoming confused. This is why calling the Abount stone a possible map should not make it smaller, as though it becomes merely practical. Practical knowledge in the Ice Age is profound. Knowing where to find animals is not a simple matter of appetite. It involves tracking seasons, terrain, weather, water, group movement, and risk. A map-like object could belong to teaching, planning, remembering, or storytelling. It could help people discuss a hunt before entering difficult ground. It could preserve the relation between places when a group is away from them. It could mark a familiar territory in a form that others can recognize. These possibilities remain inferred, but they are grounded in the demands of the world the object comes from. There is also the strange intimacy of scale. A landscape that takes hours or days to cross may be reduced to a surface small enough to hold. Hills that exhaust the legs become shortcuts in stone. A river that chills the body becomes a winding incision. Animal routes that decide hunger or survival become marks near other marks. This compression is one of the great human abilities. It allows the mind to step outside the immediate present. A person no longer sees only the fire, the cave wall, and the night beyond the entrance. Through marks, memory can travel outward. It can move beyond what the eye currently sees. Still, the stone refuses simple answers. Some researchers see a deliberate representation of the surrounding landscape. Others may urge caution, noting that human minds are skilled at finding patterns, especially when an object is already mysterious. Both impulses are necessary. Without imagination, faint traces remain mute. Without restraint, they become whatever the modern observer wants them to be. The Abond's engraving survives between those dangers. Its lines are too suggestive to ignore and too ancient to explain completely. That tension is what gives the object its power. It does not hand over a message. It draws the modern eye into the same difficulty that may have shaped its creation: how to turn land into line, movement into memory, and experience into something that can be shared. Whether the marks began as a guide, a record, a story, or a mixture of all three, they refuse to lie flat as meaningless decoration. They seem to point outward, beyond the stone, toward rivers, slopes, animals, and human paths through a changing world. The cave preserves the object, but the lines ask to be followed outside. The first landscape feature that draws the eye into the Abont stone is water, not water itself, of course, but the suggestion of it: lines that bend, fork, and run across the surface with a rhythm that feels difficult to dismiss. Rivers are among the easiest features for human beings to remember because they organize the land. They cut valleys, guide movement, gather animals, expose stone, flood crossings, and lead the traveller from one place to another without needing a road. In a world before road signs, walls, fences, or written names, a river is more than a feature. It is a route, a boundary, a source, a danger, and a thread of memory. If the Abond's engraving does represent the terrain around the cave, then the waterways may be its backbone. The cave lies within a real landscape of streams, slopes, and valleys, and some researchers have argued that the carved lines correspond to nearby river courses and their relationships. The claim is not that the stone gives a mathematically accurate survey. It is that the marks may preserve an experienced geography, one shaped by people who know how water moves through land because their own lives move around it. Scholars still debate the strength of this interpretation, but the possibility is powerful because rivers often leave the deepest marks not only in stone and soil, but in human thought. For a hunter-gatherer group, following water can be sensible, but trusting water blindly can be dangerous. A stream may guide a person toward a valley, but it may also trap movement between steep banks. In Thor, a crossing that was easy days earlier can become violent. In dry periods, a small watercourse can shrink until only damp stones remain. Winter changes everything again, hardening edges, hiding holes, turning familiar banks into slick corridors of risk. People moving through this country must know not just where water is, but what water does at different times. That knowledge is not abstract. It lives in the body in cold feet, wet hides, lost time, and the relief of finding a safe ford before light fades. On stone, a river can be reduced to a line, but the line carries more than shape. It can imply direction, passage, sound, and seasonal memory. A branching mark may show a tributary, but it may also mark a decision point. One way leads toward higher ground. Another leads toward a hunting place. Another may be avoided when rain has swollen the channel. The modern viewer sees incisions. The maker may have seen choices. What survives in the record suggests that prehistoric people were deeply attentive to the practical character of places, and waterways would have been among the most reliable anchors in their mental maps. The engraved meanders matter because they may connect the cave to the world outside it. A cave entrance alone is a point. A river system turns that point into part of a network. From the shelter, a person might move toward water, follow a bank, climb away from it, cross where stones rise, or wait where animals come down to drink. Herds are not random in such a landscape. They're drawn by water, vegetation, shelter, and terrain that permits movement. Predators know this as well. So do hunters. A river valley can become a corridor where many forms of hunger overlap. This is where the possible map becomes more than a sketch. It may be a record of attention. If the lines correspond to known watercourses, they reveal that the maker is not simply decorating a surface but arranging relationships. This stream joins that one. This bend sits near a place where animals are seen. This path follows the water before turning away. The evidence remains incomplete, and no one can recover the lost explanation that may once have accompanied the object. Yet the pattern of water-like lines gives the stone a kind of internal movement, as though it is less a picture to be admired than a surface to be followed. There is a lesser-known difficulty in studying such an object. Rivers themselves do not stay perfectly still across deep time. Channels shift, banks erode. Floods cut new paths or abandon old ones. Sediment fills hollows. Vegetation changes the way water behaves. Over thousands of years, the landscape around a bounce has not remained frozen for modern comparison. Researchers must work with present geography, geological knowledge, and cautious reconstruction, always aware that the Paleolithic terrain was related to the modern one but not identical. This makes the proposed correspondence both intriguing and fragile. A line may resemble a stream today, but the stream's old course may have been different, or a vanished channel may once have mattered and now be harder to see. Still, rivers preserve memory better than many features. Even when they shift, valleys remain. Water tends to follow weakness in rock and gravity's long instruction. A valley that guides a modern stream may have guided water in ancient times as well, even if its banks and flow changed. This is why comparison is possible at all. The engraved lines are not judged in isolation. They are considered alongside the cave's location, nearby topography, animal figures, and the broader logic of movement. No single explanation fully accounts for every mark, but the water interpretation gives the surface a structure that decoration alone may not explain. To imagine the maker reading rivers in stone is to imagine a mind moving at two scales at once. There is the small scale of the hand pressure, angle, line, correction, surface, and there is the large scale of the land, a cold stream below, a bend beyond the trees, a valley opening, a crossing remembered from a previous season. The hand carves only a few centimetres, but the mind may be travelling across kilometres. That leap, from body-sized action to landscape-sized thought, is one of the quiet marvels of human cognition. Water also has social meaning. It is where people meet the tracks of animals and sometimes the traces of other people. A footprint near a bank can tell whether someone passed recently. A broken branch, a cold hearth, or scattered bones may reveal that another group used the same corridor. Rivers connect territories but also expose travellers. They can bring abundance and conflict, familiarity and uncertainty. A map-like engraving that includes water may therefore encode not only geography, but social knowledge where to go, where others might be, where a group belongs, where caution is wise. The Abont stone gives none of this away easily. Its lines do not flow with labels. They do not tell the modern observer which branch is water, which is path, which is symbolic, and which may be damage. But the possibility that rivers lie inside those marks changes the object's silence. It makes the stone feel like a compressed journey. The eye follows a groove and begins to move outward, away from the cave floor, into valleys where water flashes under cold light and animals descend through morning mist. The stone remains small. The land it may remember is not, and between the two, in the carved distance between a line and a river, the prehistoric map begins to breathe. Beyond the rivers, the land rises. Water may guide the eye across the Abont stone, but hills and ridges give the possible map its resistance. A river can invite movement, yet a mountain decides how movement must happen. It blocks the straight path, hides one valley from another, holds snow after lower ground has thawed, and turns distance into effort. In the country around Abont, slopes and uplands are not scenery. They are obstacles, shelters, viewpoints, animal corridors, weather traps, and memory anchors. If the engraved stone preserves even a partial image of that terrain, then its lines may not only show where water runs, but where bodies climb, pause, detour, and disappear from sight. To modern people, mountains often appear as background, a horizon to admire from a road or a photograph. For late Paleolithic travellers, they are more intimate and less forgiving. A ridge changes wind, a pass controls access. A steep slope can exhaust a group carrying tools, hides, meat, children, and fuel. A high lookout can reveal movement below, but reaching it costs energy. Snow can make a familiar route vanish. Fog can reduce a known valley to a few uncertain steps. In such a landscape, a path is not simply the shortest line between two places. It is the safest line, the remembered line, the line where animals have passed before, the line where water can be found, the line where the body can survive. Some researchers have suggested that features on the Abont's engraving may correspond not only to waterways, but also to mountains, access routes, or prominent points in the surrounding terrain. This interpretation remains debated, because stone does not explain its own symbols, and the same mark can tempt different readings. A line might be a stream, a trail, a boundary of a slope, or part of an animal figure. A cluster of marks might indicate rough ground, a symbolic feature, or something now lost to damage. The evidence remains incomplete. Yet the possibility of topographic thinking matters, because it suggests that the engraver may have understood the landscape as a connected system, not a collection of isolated places. A route through rugged country is often invisible unless one already knows it. From a distance, a hillside looks continuous. Up close, it contains choices: a notch where the climb eases, a ledge where one can rest, a dangerous scree slope, a sheltered hollow, a place where animals descend because the angle allows them to move quickly. These subtle routes may not appear dramatic, but they can decide whether a hunt succeeds or fails. A group that knows them has an advantage deeper than strength. It has inherited geography. It possesses knowledge stored in bodies, stories, gestures, and perhaps marks. This is where the possible map becomes especially human. It is not enough to know that a valley exists. One must know how to enter it, where to cross out of it, where to wait, where to avoid exposure, and how long movement will take under different conditions. A carved path, if such a thing is present on the stone, may represent not a road in the modern sense but a chain of remembered decisions. It may say, in a language no longer recoverable, that the way bends here because the direct descent is too steep, or that movement follows the water until the slope opens, or that animals pass between these two high points when the season changes. There is a surprising modern bias hidden in the way ancient maps are often imagined. People expect maps to look down from above, as though the maker has somehow become a bird, but many early landscape representations may have been built from movement rather than aerial vision. They may follow the logic of travel from cave to stream, from stream to bend, from bend to slope, from slope to open ground. The importance of a feature comes from encountering it. A ridge is remembered because one climbs it. A path is remembered because feet repeat it. The map is not a detached picture of land. It is land as experienced by a moving body. For the people of Abondance, hidden movement would have mattered constantly. Animals move through terrain according to needs and limits. Ibex favour steep places where their bodies are at home and predators struggle. Deer move through woodland edges and valleys. Horses and bison may prefer more open ground, depending on climate and vegetation. Hunters must understand these preferences without turning them into written knowledge. They learn them through watching, failing, returning, and listening to those who know more. A mountain is not merely high ground, it is a map of animal habits. The stone, if connected to hunting, may have encoded this kind of knowledge, not in the rigid style of a military plan, but in a more fluid mixture of landscape and life. The placement of animal figures near certain marks could indicate where animals were expected, remembered, or symbolically associated. This does not mean every animal engraving is a hunting instruction. Paleolithic animals carry meanings modern scholars still debate, and no single explanation fully accounts for the emotional force they seem to have held. Still, in a world where animals and terrain are inseparable, it would be strange to imagine them as entirely separate categories. To picture an animal may also be to picture the place where it appears. A path can also be social. It remembers previous human movement. It may lead toward a shelter known to kin, a place where stone can be found, a crossing used by several groups, or a zone approached with caution because others may be near. The late Paleolithic world is not empty. Population densities are low compared with later farming societies, but people are aware of other people, ornaments, styles of tools, raw materials, and shared artistic traditions suggest networks of contact across wide areas. A route through hills may carry not only hunters, but information, mates, stories, objects, and obligations. What survives in the record suggests a world more connected than the stereotype of isolated wandering bands. This makes the possible paths on the stone doubly significant. They may be practical routes through land, but they may also belong to a remembered human geography. Certain places are known because ancestors used them, because a group once suffered there, because a successful hunt happened there, because another band might be encountered there, or because the place carries meaning that cannot be separated from survival. Modern maps often strip land into neutral space. Prehistoric maps, if that word can be used cautiously, may have done the opposite. They may have thickened space with memory. The relationship between mountains and visibility adds another layer. From a cave entrance or nearby high point, some features can be seen directly, while others must be inferred from experience. A person who knows the land can stand in one place and mentally continue beyond the visible horizon. That ability is easy to underestimate. It means the mind can connect seen and unseen spaces. It can hold a valley behind a ridge, a river beyond a bend, a route beyond the present view. If the Abondance engraving represents such connections, then it is not simply a drawing of what lies before the eyes. It is a drawing of what the mind knows remains there when sight fails. And this may be the hidden movement at the heart of the stone, not only the movement of rivers, animals and people, but the movement of thought itself. The carved lines may guide the eye across a surface in the same way memory guides a traveller across land. They may connect shelter to slope, water to pass, animal to place, known ground to imagined ground. The exact meaning cannot be recovered with certainty, and scholars still debate how much of the proposed topography is truly intentional. But the possibility remains haunting. On a small ancient block, the land may have been folded inward, not as a picture of wilderness, but as a record of how to move through it. The people who move beneath the changing sky around a bounce do not live in a wilderness separate from them. They live inside a field of signs. The ground speaks in prints, droppings, broken stems, disturbed gravel, feathers, old bones, damp ash, and the faint paths animals leave when they cross the same slope again and again. The air speaks through temperature, cloud shape, wind direction, and the smell of rain before it reaches the valley. Water speaks by rising, slowing, freezing, or cutting fresh edges into a bank. To survive here is not simply to be tough. It is to be literate in a world without writing. If the engraved stone is connected to hunting terrain, then it belongs to this literacy. Its lines may not have been meant for strangers. They may have been meaningful only to people who already knew the land, the way a few marks can awaken a whole journey in someone who has walked it before. The possible rivers and paths would not replace experience. They would call experience back. A bend in a line might remind someone of a crossing where the stones sit just below the surface. A mark near an animal figure might evoke a slope where ibex appear when wind moves from the north. A branching groove might indicate not only where water divides, but where a group must decide which way to go before daylight weakens. Hunting in this world is not a heroic instant. It is a long sequence of observation, waiting, failure, adjustment, and sometimes luck. Animals are not passive supplies moving through empty scenery. They have senses sharper than human convenience allows. They hear badly placed steps, smell bodies on a shifting wind, and know escape routes shaped by generations of their own kind. A successful hunt begins before the weapon is thrown. It begins with knowing when the herd is likely to pass. Where terrain narrows movement, how far people can travel without exhausting themselves, and whether weather will hide or betray them. No single explanation fully accounts for every mark on the abhorrent stone. But a landscape image joined to animal knowledge would fit a world where hunting is strategy more than impulse. The sky is part of that strategy. Late Ice Age weather is not merely background mood. It determines where people can move, how animals behave, and whether a plan survives contact with the day. A cold, clear morning may preserve tracks sharply in frost. A sudden thaw may erase them. Wind from the wrong direction can carry human scent downhill. Fog can conceal hunters, but it can also hide cliffs, scatter people, and make familiar distances uncertain. Snow can reveal animal movement like a written surface, then bury danger beneath a soft layer. People who live here learn the sky not as forecast, but as pattern. They carry weather in memory because weather decides hunger. River crossings make this dependence even more immediate. A group following animals across a valley must know where water can be passed safely. A river that looks shallow from above may be slick, deep, or fast at the centre. Meltwater can turn familiar crossings into traps. Children, older people, carried meat, toolkits, and hides all change the calculation. A hunter alone might risk a crossing that a whole group cannot. The map-like marks on stone, if they record waterways, may therefore represent more than simple geography. They may indicate places where the human body meets the power of the landscape and must negotiate with it. Remembered places matter because experience is never evenly spread. Some members of a group know certain routes better than others. An older person may remember a valley before vegetation changed. A skilled tracker may know where red deer shift after storms. A younger hunter may know a recent trail but not the deeper pattern of seasons. Knowledge has to move between minds. It moves through walking together, through gestures, through repeated stories, through corrections made in the moment, and perhaps through marks on portable surfaces. Scholars still debate how objects like the Abont stone were used, but the need to share spatial knowledge is beyond dispute. There is a quieter human consequence here. A map-like object implies not just intelligence, but trust. For marks to matter, people must agree that they refer to something. They must share enough memory for a line to call up a place. A carved bend has meaning only if someone else can understand, or if the maker intends to remember through it later. That shared understanding is a social achievement. It means the landscape is not held by one mind alone. It is distributed across a group, carried in many bodies, corrected by many journeys, and strengthened when people gather around fire to speak of where they have been and where they may go. The animals beneath this changing sky are also changing with the world. As climate shifts, vegetation alters the routes and habits of prey. Open country animals may move differently as woodland expands. Cold-adapted species may retreat or decline in some regions. Others find new opportunities. These changes are not experienced as a neat ecological transition. They appear as local surprises, fewer tracks where tracks used to be. New growth blocking an old line of sight, a herd arriving late, an empty slope, an unfamiliar abundance in another valley. What survives in the record suggests that Paleolithic groups were flexible, but flexibility has a cost. It requires attention without rest. This is where the possible map becomes a response to instability. In a stable world, memory alone may feel sufficient. In a changing world, memory must be tested, revised, and sometimes anchored. A carved object can preserve a version of knowledge at a particular moment the rivers as known, the routes as used, the animal places as remembered. It may also help people think through change, comparing what was expected with what is seen. The stone does not need to be a formal planning document to be part of planning. It may have been one element in a larger web of speech, gesture, habit, and observation. The human figures themselves are absent from the engraving, or at least not clearly present in the way animals and lines may be, yet their absence makes them more vivid. They are implied by every decision the surface records. Someone has stood in the wind and watched. Someone has crossed water. Someone has waited above a valley while animals move below. Someone has returned to the cave with news, with meat, with nothing, or with a story of why the old route failed. Someone has carved marks that may preserve the relation between shelter, terrain, and life. The people are gone, but their attention remains. And attention may be the real subject of the Abont stone. Not territory as possession, not map-making as technical achievement, not hunting as violence alone, but attention as survival. The world around the cave is too large to control, too changeable to reduce completely, and too dangerous to ignore. The people beneath that sky live by noticing. They notice the rise of water, the angle of hoof prints, the softening of snow, the silence where animals should be, the opening between hills, the return of a path after winter. If some of that noticing entered stone, then the object is not a curiosity from a simple past. It is a remnant of minds working intensely within a living landscape, where every line may have once pointed toward weather, movement, memory, and the difficult hope of finding food before the light was gone. The most difficult part of the Abont stone is not the cutting of lines. Hands had been cutting, scraping, shaping, and engraving for a very long time before this object entered the record. The harder mystery is the act of reduction. A living landscape is immense. It has weather, smell, danger, sound, distance, fatigue, and memory. A valley cannot be held in the palm. A river cannot be carried into a cave. A mountain cannot be turned over beside a fire. Yet the mind can take those things and make them smaller. It can decide that a river may become a groove, that a ridge may become an angle, that a route may become a sequence of marks, and that a place too large for the body may still be brought under human attention. That is the cognitive leap hidden behind the possible map. It is easy to admire prehistoric art when it shows the body of an animal with grace and force, because the resemblance is visible. A horse looks like a horse. An ibex looks like an ibex. But a landscape is harder to picture because it is not encountered all at once. It is learned through movement. One part appears from a slope, another after a bend, another only after a day of walking. To represent that kind of knowledge, the maker must do more than copy what the eyes see in a single moment. The maker must assemble experience across time. If the Abond's engraving contains a mapped landscape, even partly, then it reveals a mind capable of holding relations between places that are not simultaneously visible. The cave is here. The water runs there. The route bends beyond the next rise. The animals appear in relation to slope, season, and passage. This is not simple memory in the sense of recalling an image. It is structured memory, arranged so that one thing leads to another. Scholars still debate how much of that structure is truly present on the stone, but the possibility draws attention to an ability that defines human beings, the power to think beyond the immediate scene. This ability matters in every journey. A hunter at the cave mouth cannot see every valley his group may use. A traveller inside the cave cannot see the river hidden below. A child learning the land cannot yet hold all its turns and risks. Marks can bridge these gaps. They turn a remembered route into something outside the mind, something that can be touched, pointed to, corrected, or used to guide a story. The object may not have functioned as a map in the modern sense, but it could have served as a surface where memory became shared space. There is a lesser-known truth about human cognition. The earliest maps do not have to begin with measurement. They can begin with relation, near and far, above and below, before and after, safe and dangerous, seen and unseen. Even today, ordinary navigation often works this way. People do not always remember exact distances. They remember that the path turns after the large tree, that the water comes before the climb, that the open ground lies beyond the narrow place. A Paleolithic map-like object may have used this relational logic, showing what mattered in the order that mattered, not according to a scale drawn from detached surveying. This makes the marks deeply practical, but not merely practical. Imagination is not the opposite of survival. In the Paleolithic world, imagination may be one of survival's most important tools. To plan a hunt, a person must imagine animals not yet seen. To choose a route, a person must imagine terrain beyond the present view. To teach a child, an elder must make absent places mentally present. To carve a possible landscape into stone, the maker must imagine that a line can stand for something it is not. That substitution is simple only after it has become familiar. At some first moment, it is extraordinary. The engraved surface also suggests a relationship between hand and thought that is easy to miss. Thinking does not happen only inside the skull. It often happens through materials. A person draws a line, sees it, responds to it, adds another, deepens a groove, turns the stone, and discovers that the object helps organize what the mind already knows. The carving may be a record of thought, but it may also be part of thinking itself. What survives in the record suggests that prehistoric people used objects not only as tools for cutting or hunting, but as tools for remembering, marking, ornamenting, and perhaps reasoning. The portability of the object matters. Wall images belong to place. They are fixed to the cave or rock surface. A smaller engraved block can move, or at least can be handled. It can be brought near the fire, shown to another person, stored, lost, or carried for some distance. If the burnt stone was portable in use, then the landscape it may represent could travel away from the landscape itself. A person could hold signs of a valley while sitting in darkness. A group could discuss a route without standing on it. Yet the mind behind the marks remains unreachable. No face rises clearly from the stone. No name attaches to the hand. The engraver may have been a skilled adult, a hunter, a maker of images, a person teaching others, or someone adding to marks already present. Some lines may belong to different moments. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single explanation fully accounts for the object's biography. But uncertainty does not empty the stone of meaning. It gives it depth. It reminds us that prehistoric cognition must be approached through traces, not confessions. The most careful interpretation sees the burnt stone not as proof of a fully developed cartographic tradition, but as evidence that spatial abstraction was within reach and likely familiar in forms that rarely survive. Lines in dust vanish. Gestures vanish. Spoken root knowledge vanishes. A stick drawing beside a hearth disappears with the next step. Stone endures by accident as much as intention. So the object may be exceptional, not because no one else thought this way, but because almost all other traces of such thinking have been erased. This changes the old image of prehistoric people moving through the land by instinct alone. Their movement is guided by remembered patterns, shared knowledge, symbolic capacity, and the ability to imagine what lies beyond sight. The burnt stone, if it is a map, is not only a representation of terrain, it is a representation of distance conquered by thought. The world outside the cave is vast, cold, and unstable. The stone is small. Between them lies the human mind, making the unseen present, and proving that long before writing, people were already turning experience into signs that could outlast the moment of need. The more powerful a prehistoric object becomes in the imagination, the more carefully it has to be held. The burnt stone invites wonder because it seems to open a door onto something rarely preserved, a mind arranging land into signs. But wonder is not evidence by itself. Archaeology works in the space between fascination and restraint, and this object lives exactly there. Its lines are suggestive. Its setting is meaningful. Its age is extraordinary. Yet the stone does not speak plainly. It offers marks, not explanations. It gives pattern, not certainty. To understand it responsibly, one has to keep two truths in view at the same time. The possible map may be real, and the evidence remains incomplete. The first layer of evidence is physical. The marks are not imagined onto a blank surface. They exist as incisions made into stone. They vary in depth, direction, and relationship. Some appear deliberate, some overlap. Some may belong to figures. Some may belong to linear arrangements that have been interpreted as rivers, routes, or terrain. Before any larger interpretation can begin, researchers must ask whether the lines are human-made, whether they belong to the same period of use, whether damage has altered them, and whether later processes have confused the surface. Stone can break, scratch, weather, and deceive. A natural crack may look meaningful if the eye wants it to. A deliberate mark may become ambiguous after thousands of years. This is why the study of such an object is slow. It cannot rely on a single glance or a dramatic claim. Researchers examine tool marks, compare orientations, make drawings, photograph under changing light, and consider how the engraved surface relates to other artifacts from the site. They ask what is visible, what is damaged, and what can be separated from wishful reading. The most responsible claims begin with description before interpretation. There are lines, Some lines form shapes. Some shapes resemble features that may correspond to the surrounding landscape. Beyond that, each step requires caution. The second layer is context. An engraved object from a Paleolithic cave does not float outside time. It belongs to a world already rich in symbolic and practical marks. Upper Paleolithic people made animal images, abstract signs, ornaments, tools of great refinement, and portable objects whose purposes are not always easy to separate. This makes a map-like engraving possible in broad human terms. The people who made it had the skill to engrave, the cognitive ability to abstract, and the practical reason to care about landscape. What survives in the record suggests that they were not limited to immediate perception. They planned, remembered, and moved through wide territories with knowledge that had to be transmitted. But possibility is not proof. A person can be capable of making a map without every complex engraving being a map. This is where doubt enters honestly. Pattern recognition is one of the strengths of the human mind, but also one of its traps. Modern observers are especially trained to see maps everywhere, because modern life is saturated with them. A winding line suggests a river, a cluster suggests hills, a crossing suggests a route. Once the idea appears, the mind begins arranging the surface around it. Scholars still debate how far that recognition reflects the original intention, and how far it reflects the habits of modern interpretation. There is no shame in that uncertainty. In fact, it is what makes the object scientifically interesting. If the stone were obvious, the debate would end quickly. If it were meaningless, it would not hold attention for long. Instead, it occupies a middle ground where evidence pulls in more than one direction. Some features seem too organized to ignore. Others resist neat explanation. Some may align with local geography. Others may be symbolic, decorative, damaged, or unrelated. No single explanation fully accounts for every mark. The stone is not a solved code. It is a surviving surface from a vanished act of thought. One careful way to approach it is to avoid asking whether it is a map in the modern sense. That question may be too narrow. A better question is whether it contains spatial information. Spatial information can exist without modern cartography. It can be partial, symbolic, selective, and tied to story or use. A carved surface may represent a territory not as a measured diagram, but as a meaningful arrangement of relationships: cave, water, slope, animal, path, danger, memory. If that is what Abonce preserves, then calling it simply a map may be both useful and misleading. Useful because it points to landscape representation. Misleading because it risks imposing modern expectations on a Paleolithic mind. The animal figures complicate the interpretation further. In Paleolithic art, animals are never merely animals in the simple sense. They are food, companions in the landscape, objects of attention, sources of material, beings with behavior, and perhaps carriers of meanings that modern people can only partly approach. If animals appear near possible terrain marks, the relationship could be practical, symbolic, narrative, or all of these at once. A modern hunting map might separate prey from topography. A Paleolithic engraving may not. The animal may belong to the place, and the place may be understood through the animal. There is also the problem of time. The engraved stone may not represent one single moment of carving. Lines could have been added, deepened, reused, or reinterpreted. An object can accumulate meaning. A mark made for one reason can later become part of another pattern. A surface can be handled across time, its original purpose shifting as people return to it. The evidence remains incomplete, because the sequence of gestures is almost impossible to reconstruct fully. This means that even if some marks are spatial, not every mark must belong to the same spatial design. And yet, doubt does not make the object smaller, it makes the mystery sharper. The careful claim is not that the Abant stone proves a lost science of prehistoric cartography. It does not. The careful claim is that the object may preserve one of the earliest known examples of humans representing a real or meaningful landscape through engraved marks, and that this possibility fits within what is known about late Paleolithic intelligence, mobility, and symbolic life. That is already a profound statement. It needs no exaggeration. The stone asks for humility in both directions. It warns against underestimating prehistoric people, imagining them as trapped in a narrow world of instinct and immediate need. But it also warns against turning every ancient ambiguity into a modern fantasy. The truth is more delicate. A person in the late Paleolithic may have carved lines that carried landscape knowledge, and the modern world may never recover exactly how those lines were read. Between those facts lies the real drama of archaeology, not the easy unveiling of secrets, but the patient work of approaching a lost mind without pretending to possess it. So the Abant stone remains suspended between evidence and absence. Its surface offers enough to suggest intention, enough to invite comparison, enough to challenge old assumptions. It also withholds enough to keep certainty beyond reach. That tension is not a failure of the story. It is the story. The map, if it is a map, survives not as a complete answer, but as a careful invitation. Follow the lines, but do not force them. Imagine the landscape, but do not invent it. Listen to the stone, but remember how quietly it speaks. The Abant stone feels less lonely when it is placed beside the wider human habit of turning place into sign. It may be rare, perhaps astonishingly rare, but the impulse behind it is not strange. Human beings have always needed ways to carry territory beyond the immediate view. Long before there are surveyors with instruments, sailors with charts, kings with boundaries, or scribes with tablets, there are people who must remember where water lies, where animals move, where danger begins. And where return is possible, a map can be born from administration, but it can also be born from hunger, distance, and the simple need to explain a path before someone walks it. Later, ancient maps are easier to recognize because they come closer to familiar forms. Some are carved, painted, pressed into clay, drawn on papyrus, or arranged as diagrams of fields, cities, rivers, and worlds. In Mesopotamia, clay tablets eventually record not only words and numbers but spatial relationships, plots of land, canals, towns, and imagined cosmic geography. In Egypt, maps can guide quarrying expeditions or mark routes through desert space. In the classical world, geography becomes tied to trade, empire, astronomy, and argument. These later maps belong to societies with writing, labour organisation, taxation, and political territory. Their purposes are clearer because they sit inside systems that leave many kinds of evidence behind. The Paleolithic world leaves a different kind of record. It does not give long inscriptions explaining how land is measured or why a route matters. Its maps, if they existed in abundance, were mostly made from materials that vanish. A line drawn with a finger in dust disappears. A route scratched into snow melts. A teaching sketch made in ash is scattered by the next footstep. A pattern laid with sticks beside a hearth burns, rots, or is kicked apart. The survival of a stone like the one from Abounce may therefore be less a sign of uniqueness than a sign of preservation's cruelty. The deep past may have been full of temporary maps, but almost none were made in a medium stubborn enough to reach us. Other prehistoric and early historic objects remind us that mapping is not always a neat picture of land from above. Some carved stones, bone objects, and painted surfaces have been interpreted as marks of territory, routes, constellations, animal movements, or symbolic landscapes. Many of these interpretations remain debated, and rightly so. A group of lines can tempt the imagination. A pattern may look like a valley to one scholar and like abstract notation to another. No single explanation fully accounts for the many forms of early mark-making. Still, across human societies, the need to represent space appears again and again, sometimes in ways that modern mapmakers would barely recognize as maps. Indigenous mapping traditions from more recent times offer a useful caution, though they should not be treated as direct copies of Paleolithic practice. In many cultures, routes, waterholes, seasonal territories, sacred places, and travel knowledge are carried through song, story, gesture, carving, body movement, and memory rather than through fixed paper diagrams. A map can be performed, it can be sung, it can be remembered as a chain of places. It can be embedded in a story that teaches not only where to go, but how to behave when one arrives. This does not prove that a bounce worked in the same way. The evidence remains incomplete. But it reminds us that modern printed cartography is only one branch of a much older human tree. The difference matters because the abounce stone may have combined functions that later societies separate. It may have been landscape, hunting memory, teaching surface, symbol, and image all at once. A modern person may ask whether it is art or map, ritual or tool, decoration or information. The prehistoric answer may have been yes to several at once. A river can be useful and sacred, an animal can be prey and presence, a route can be practical and ancestral, a stone can be an object, a reminder and a small world held in the hand. When later maps become attached to states, they often become instruments of control. They divide land, assign ownership, plan roads, tax fields, and support armies. That is not the world of a bounce. If the stone contains mapped knowledge, it belongs to a different relationship with territory. It is not about drawing borders around property. It is about moving through a land that no one can command fully. The people who might have read it do not possess the river in the later legal sense. They know it. They return to it. They depend on it. Their map, if map it is, may be less a claim of ownership than a memory of belonging and use. This older kind of mapping is easily underestimated because it leaves fewer official traces. Empires want maps that last because administration depends on records. Mobile hunter-gatherers often need maps that live in people, objects, and repeated journeys. Their knowledge can be exact without being written. A person may know a valley with more practical accuracy than a stranger holding a measured chart. They may know where the wind becomes dangerous, where animals hesitate, where ice forms late, where stones suitable for tools can be found, and where a sheltered place lies beyond a ridge. Such knowledge is not primitive because it is unwritten. It is simply carried differently. The abounce stone also invites comparison with another kind of ancient mapping, the mapping of the sky. Prehistoric people watched stars, moon phases, seasonal light, and animal cycles, though the degree to which particular ancient marks represent astronomical records is often debated. The important point is not to force every prehistoric sign into a celestial code. It is to recognize that humans are pattern-making beings. They connect events across time and space. They notice recurrence. They use signs to stabilize what would otherwise pass away, whether on land or in the sky. Mapping begins when the mind recognizes relationship and gives it form. In this wider history, a bounce appears near the faint beginning of a long continuum. Later maps will become more explicit, more technical, more tied to writing and power, but the deeper root is older and quieter. It lies in the hunter explaining a route, the gatherer remembering water, the elder teaching a dangerous crossing, the traveller holding a valley in memory after leaving it behind. What survives in the record suggests that this route was already alive in the Paleolithic. The stone may be one of the rare moments when it breaks the surface, and so the possible map from a bounce should not be treated as a miraculous object dropped into an otherwise blank prehistoric mind. It belongs to a human pattern that stretches across time the need to make the absent present. A map is a way of saying that a place continues when one is not there to see it. The river still bends beyond the cave, the ridge still rises beyond the river. The animals still move through a corridor remembered from another season. The hand carves a line, and the line keeps the place waiting. The landscape that may live inside the abhorrent stone is not the landscape that surrounds the cave today. This is one of the quiet difficulties of the mystery. A map, if it is a map, always belongs to a moment. It preserves a version of the world as someone knew it. But the world keeps moving after the hand is gone. Rivers shift, forests rise, slopes erode, animal paths fade under new vegetation. Human routes are replaced by tracks, then roads, then fields, then boundaries with names. The engraved lines remain small and still, while the land they may have described has spent thousands of years changing its face. At the end of the Ice Age, northern Spain is passing through a long transformation. The cold world of open spaces, hardy vegetation, and wide animal movement does not suddenly become the warmer Holocene landscape. It changes unevenly, with climatic pulses that alter the balance between grassland, woodland, snow, water, and game. The people who know a bounce live within that transition without seeing its full arc. To them, a valley is not evidence of a global climate shift. It is a place where the old hunting pattern still works, or no longer works, or works only at certain times. Climate history becomes personal through empty slopes, late migrations, swollen streams, and new cover spreading where visibility once reached farther. As temperatures rise in the long aftermath of glacial conditions, vegetation begins to reclaim ground that had been more open, trees expand, shrubland thickens. Valleys that once offered broad sightlines may become more enclosed. That change is not merely cosmetic. A hunter who once watched animals from a distance may now lose them behind growth. Herds that favoured open terrain may shift away, while woodland species become more important. Paths used by people can become harder to follow if they are not walked often. A remembered route can become overgrown within a lifetime. What survives in the record suggests adaptation, but adaptation is rarely peaceful from the inside. It is made of revised expectations. Rivers also write and rewrite the land. The watercourses that may be echoed in the stone are not fixed lines engraved by nature forever. Seasonal floods cut banks and move gravel. Channels migrate within valleys. Sediments gather and are torn away. A crossing that was useful to one generation may become dangerous to another. A bend that served as a landmark may soften, shift, or disappear under later deposits, over millennia. These small changes accumulate until the ancient river is partly hidden beneath the modern one. Researchers can compare the engraving with present topography, but they must do so while remembering that the Paleolithic landscape was not a perfect copy of the modern view. Erosion adds another kind of forgetting. Hillsides shed stone, frost breaks rock, rain carries soil downhill, cave entrances change as debris gathers or collapses. Paths across slopes vanish when their surfaces slip away. Even the cave itself, which seems solid compared with human life, is part of geology's slow movement. Limestone dissolves, sediments accumulate, openings narrow, widen, or become less obvious. The place that modern visitors and researchers approach is therefore not exactly the place a Paleolithic group approached. It is related, deeply related, but altered by thousands of years of weather and time. Then come the animals, whose absence may be the most profound change of all. The world remembered by the engraving, if it is a hunting landscape, would have been alive with animal patterns that no longer exist in the same way. Some species remain in altered numbers or ranges. Others have vanished from the region or from the planet. Herd behavior changes with climate and human pressure. Predators follow prey. Scavengers follow both. The land is not just shaped by animals. It is animated by their habits. A valley without its old herds is not the same valley, even if the stones remain. A map of hunting terrain can become a ghost map when the animals it expects no longer arrive. Human movement also transforms the land, first lightly and then with increasing force. Paleolithic groups leave traces. but they do not plough valleys into permanent fields or build villages that anchor generations to one place. Later, as the Holocene deepens, farming spreads into many regions of Europe. Forests are cleared, domestic animals graze, soil is turned, settlements appear, boundaries harden, roads begin to channel movement in new ways. The land becomes layered with uses that the engraver could not have imagined. A route once followed because of animal migration may disappear beneath a field. A river crossing once chosen by hunters may become a bridge, a road, a forgotten bank behind modern growth. This layering creates a strange problem for anyone trying to read the stone. The modern landscape is both clue and disguise. It preserves the broad bones of the ancient terrain, the valleys, the ridges, the drainage patterns, the relation between cave and surrounding ground. But it also hides the old world beneath later vegetation, settlement, erosion, and names. To compare stone and land is to peel back a landscape that has been written over many times. No single explanation fully accounts for every mark because no single view can restore every vanished feature. Yet the disappearance of the old landscape also makes the stone more moving. If the engraving does preserve spatial knowledge, then it may be one of the few surviving witnesses to a place as it was known by people whose world has otherwise dissolved. Not a photograph, not a survey, not a complete record, but a fragment of perception from a vanished environment. It may remember a river before later floods changed its banks. It may remember routes before forest closed them. It may remember animal places before the animals shifted away. It may preserve, in miniature, a relationship between people and land that no longer exists except through traces. The stone therefore belongs to two landscapes at once. One is the physical landscape around a bounce, altered but still present, where hills rise and water moves through valleys. The other is the lost landscape of Paleolithic experience, made of cold air, open sight lines, seasonal risk, animal movement, and paths learned by repeated travel. The first can be visited, the second has to be reconstructed carefully, always with uncertainty. Scholars still debate how much of it can be recovered from the engraving, but the effort itself reveals something important. A map is not only a record of place, it is a record of a relationship with place. And that relationship has changed almost beyond recognition. Modern people often move through landscapes without needing to know them deeply. Roads decide direction, screens provide distance, weather is checked before leaving, water comes through pipes, food comes from systems too vast to see. The people of a bounce had no such separation. The land was immediate, demanding, and intimate. If they marked it on stone, they did so because it mattered directly to life. The landscape that no longer exists is not only a lost arrangement of rivers, trees, and animals. It is a lost way of paying attention, one in which every slope, bend, crossing, and track could carry the weight of survival. The reason no one expected a stone like this is not that prehistoric people lacked intelligence. Archaeology has been proving the opposite for generations. The deeper reason is that modern imagination often lags behind the evidence. It is easy to accept that Paleolithic people could make tools, follow animals, survive cold, and paint extraordinary creatures on cave walls. It is harder, somehow, to picture them organizing space with the same seriousness, planning movement across a remembered territory, and perhaps reducing a known landscape into a set of marks that others could understand. The Abance stone unsettles expectation because it does not merely show skill, it suggests a way of thinking. For a long time, the deep human past was placed in a kind of waiting room before history. History, in the older imagination, began when cities rose, crops were planted, writing appeared, kings named themselves, and monuments stood in straight lines beneath the sun. Everything before that was often treated as preparation important, but dimmer, simpler, less organized. Hunter-gatherers were imagined as reactive people, moving after food, responding to weather, living close to instinct. That picture was never fair, and the evidence has steadily worn it down, but traces of it remain in the questions people ask. How could they know so much? How could they plan so far? How could they map a place before writing existed? The answer is that writing is not the beginning of thought. It is one powerful technology for preserving thought. Long before writing, people must remember kinship, roots, seasons, animal habits, tool-making procedures, dangers, stories, obligations, and the behavior of materials. A stone point requires planning. A sewn garment requires planning. A seasonal round across a dangerous landscape requires planning. The world of abeyance is not simple because it lacks cities. In many ways, it demands a sharper daily intelligence than settled life later allows, because mistakes cannot easily be hidden inside large stores of grain or repaired by calling on distant institutions. A wrong decision can become hunger very quickly. The possible map matters because it makes spatial intelligence visible. Many forms of prehistoric knowledge vanish because they live in action. Tracking leaves few permanent marks unless footprints fossilize by extraordinary chance. Navigation leaves almost none. Teaching a route leaves nothing if it happens through speech and gesture. A hunter can carry an entire region in memory and leave behind only a broken tool. When modern observers underestimate ancient people, part of the problem is preservation. The record favours stone, bone, pigment, and fire, while the richest human knowledge often passes through breath and movement. The abounce engraving may be startling because it catches, in durable form, something that usually disappears. It also challenges the tidy separation between art and information. Cave art is often granted emotional and symbolic depth, while practical diagrams are expected to belong to later, more technical societies. But the prehistoric world may not have made that division. A mark can be beautiful and useful. An animal can be admired, feared, hunted, remembered, and spiritually significant. A river can be a water source, a path, a boundary, and a story. If the stone joins animals with terrain-like lines, it may reveal not a primitive confusion of categories, but a more integrated way of seeing. Modern categories may be the awkward tools here, not Paleolithic thought. This is why the object feels quietly revolutionary without needing sensational claims. It does not require lost continents, secret civilizations, or impossible technologies. It requires only the recognition that people near the end of the Ice Age were fully capable of abstraction. They could think about places not immediately visible. They could relate one location to another. They could choose which features mattered enough to mark. They could compress distance into symbol. Scholars still debate the details of the abounce interpretation, and the evidence remains incomplete. But none of the proposed abilities are beyond what is already known about Upper Paleolithic humans. The surprise, then, belongs mostly to us. We are surprised because the object violates a lazy timeline in which humans become mentally modern only when they begin to resemble farmers, builders, administrators, and writers. Yet the human brain that carved the stone was not waiting to become ours. It already belonged to our species, with the same basic capacity for memory, imagination, grief, humour, anxiety, and planning. The difference lay in tools, materials, lifeways, and what the surrounding world demanded. A Paleolithic person did not need a city to think complexly. They needed a landscape, a group, a problem, and time. Territorial understanding is another reason the stone unsettles expectations. Territory in this context does not have to mean property with borders. It can mean known land, the places where a group moves, returns, hunts, shelters, gathers material, meets others, avoids danger, and tells stories. Such territory can be deep without being fenced. It can be remembered without being written. It can be defended, shared, crossed, or negotiated without appearing on any official document. If the Abant's stone preserves part of such a known landscape, it hints at a human relationship with place that is older than ownership, but no less meaningful. There is a surprising humility in this realization. Modern people often possess more maps than any previous society, and know less about the ground beneath their feet. A screen can direct a person through a city they do not understand. A road can carry someone across a mountain range without requiring them to know the passes, water sources, animal paths, or weather signs. Paleolithic people had no such insulation. Their knowledge of land was not decorative, it was lived. The possible map from a bounce may seem crude to a modern eye, but the knowledge behind it may have been precise in ways modern mapping does not capture. The object also reminds us that abstraction probably emerged from need as much as wonder. The ability to make signs is often associated with ritual or art, and those dimensions may be present. But abstraction also helps solve ordinary problems. How to remember where a river forks. How to show a young person the relation between cave and valley. How to discuss a hunt without standing in the open. How to carry a route inside the group's shared attention. No single explanation fully accounts for every mark, yet the object makes these possibilities reasonable rather than fanciful. That is why no one expected it, and why it matters that it exists at all. It arrives from a time that many people still imagine as mute, and it appears to say that the land was already being thought about in layered, symbolic ways, not measured like a modern survey, not labelled like a school atlas, not fixed like a state boundary, but known, remembered, selected, and perhaps carved into form. The stone does not make Paleolithic people more human. They already were. It makes modern observers less able to deny it. The stone does not become legible because one person glances at it and suddenly sees the lost world. That is the romantic version of discovery, and it rarely survives contact with the real work. The long deciphering of an object like the Abant's engraving is slower, more repetitive, and in some ways more remarkable. It depends on patient looking, on returning to the same surface again and again, on changing the angle of light, on drawing what the eye thinks it sees, then testing whether the line is truly there. The mystery is not solved by inspiration alone. It is approached through discipline. The first task is almost humble to see the stone accurately. This sounds simple until one remembers what time does to a surface. Thousands of years can bruise an object with scratches, cracks, worn edges, mineral deposits, pressure marks, and breaks that mimic intention. A line carved by a human hand may sit beside accidental damage. A later abrasion may cross an older engraving. A meaningful groove may be shallow enough to vanish under poor light. The researcher has to decide what belongs to the ancient composition and what belongs to the long afterlife of the object. The evidence remains incomplete, not only because the past is missing, but because even what survives is altered. Under careful examination, depth begins to matter, direction begins to matter. The shape of a groove can reveal the movement of a tool. A deliberate incision may have a controlled profile, a beginning, an end, a pressure that changes as the hand moves. Overlapping marks can hint at sequence, though not always clearly. If one line cuts through another, perhaps it came later. If two lines share the same technique, perhaps they belong together. But these clues are delicate. Stone is not a diary. It records pressure, not intention. It preserves motion, not meaning. Researchers make drawings because the hand can sometimes understand what the eye misses. Tracing an engraving is a way of thinking with the object. Each mark must be followed carefully, separated from nearby damage, placed in relation to the whole. A drawing can clarify pattern, but it can also introduce danger, because interpretation can slip into the act of recording. The person drawing must constantly ask whether a line is being observed or completed by expectation. This is one reason prehistoric engravings are often studied through multiple methods: direct observation, photography, microscopy, casts, digital enhancement, and comparison. No single method owns the truth. Light is another instrument. A groove that seems invisible from one angle may appear sharply from another. Raking light can throw tiny shadows across incisions, revealing marks that flat illumination conceals. Magnification can show tool movement. High-resolution photography can capture details that the tired eye loses. Sometimes the object has to be studied as though it were a landscape itself, with ridges, valleys, cuts, and worn surfaces. The irony is quiet but fitting. To understand a possible map, researchers must map the stone. Then comes comparison with the land outside. If the engraving may represent rivers, roots, or mountains, those proposed features must be tested against actual geography. The cave's position matters. Nearby streams matter. The shape of valleys matters. The relation between possible animal figures and possible terrain marks matters. Researchers look for correspondences, but they must avoid forcing them. A resemblance is not enough. Many winding lines can be made to look like rivers if one wants them to. The stronger argument comes from patterns of relationship: a branch here, a bend there, a feature placed in a way that makes sense beside others. Scholars still debate how persuasive these correspondences are, and that debate is part of the object's seriousness. The work also requires knowledge of the wider Paleolithic world. An engraving cannot be understood only as a strange isolated puzzle. It must be compared with other portable objects, other signs, other animal representations, other patterns of symbolic behavior. Some marks may fit known habits of Upper Paleolithic engraving. Others may stand apart. If an interpretation is too unique, it becomes fragile. If it fits too easily into a broad category, it may lose what makes it special. The Abont stone sits in the difficult middle, is related to the artistic and symbolic traditions of its time, yet the possible landscape reading gives it a particular force. There is a lesser-known emotional quality to this kind of research, the discipline of not knowing too quickly. The modern mind wants resolution. It wants the marks to become a river, a mountain, a path, a hunting scene, a map. But serious interpretation often means living with a surface for years without closing it prematurely. A researcher may propose one reading, then revise it after better images, different comparisons, or new understanding of the site. A line once thought accidental may become important. A mark once emphasized may fade into uncertainty. The object changes as methods change, though the stone itself remains still. Excavation context adds another layer of patience. The engraved block belongs to sediments, associated artifacts, dating evidence, and the history of the cave's occupation. Its meaning cannot be separated from where it was found and what surrounded it. Was it in a layer linked to late Magdalenian activity? What other objects were present? What animals appear in the faunal remains? What tools were used at the site? What does the broader occupation suggest about seasonality, hunting, or movement? These questions do not translate the engraving directly, but they narrow the world in which translation becomes possible. Even after all this, the final result is not certainty in the ordinary sense. Archaeology often works with degrees of confidence. A claim may be plausible, strongly argued, suggestive, disputed, or unsupported. The Abont stone does not offer the clean satisfaction of a modern labelled map. It offers a convergence of marks, Context, geography, and human possibility. No single explanation fully accounts for every line, and no responsible researcher can recover the exact words or gestures that may once have accompanied it. The long work of deciphering therefore becomes an act of approach rather than possession. And yet, that approach matters. Each careful drawing, each microscopic image, each comparison with the surrounding terrain pulls the stone a little farther from silence. Not completely, never completely, but enough to make the ancient act visible. Someone marked this surface, someone chose lines, someone lived in a world where rivers, slopes, animals, and roots mattered intensely. Modern researchers, leaning over the stone under controlled light, are separated from that person by more than 13 millennia, but both are doing something strangely connected. Both are trying to make sense of lines. Both are asking how a small surface can hold a larger world. Before writing, memory has to work harder. It cannot rest in books, tablets, ledgers, or inscriptions. It cannot be sent safely into the future by marks whose sounds and meanings are agreed upon across a kingdom. It has to live in bodies, voices, habits, paths, tools, scars, ornaments, and places. The people of Abeyance do not write the names of rivers. They do not record the season of a hunt in a dated archive. They do not leave a list of who travelled, who stayed behind, or which valley failed them in a hard year. Yet their world is not without record. It is recorded differently, in repeated movement, and in the careful storage of knowledge inside a community. A route can be a kind of text before writing exists. It has a beginning, an order, a sequence of signs, and a consequence if it is misread. From the cave, one moves toward water, then along a bank, then toward a slope, then across a pass when weather allows. Each landmark carries instruction. The river bend says where the crossing may be found. The ridge says where wind will strike. The stand of trees says where fuel may be gathered. The cliff face says where ibex may appear, or where a careless step may end a life. Nothing is written, but everything must be read. If the Abeyance stone preserves a map-like image, it belongs to this older world of reading without script. Its marks may not be words, but they may have helped hold relations between places. They may have worked with speech, gesture, and memory rather than replacing them. A person could point to a carved line and evoke a river known by everyone present. Another mark could summon a route, a hunting place, a danger, or a story of an earlier journey. The object would not need to explain itself to strangers. It would need only to activate knowledge already shared among those who understood its signs. This is one reason prehistoric objects can seem silent to modern people even when they may once have been rich with meaning. Writing carries part of its key within itself, at least when the script is known. A map with labels tells a stranger what to call places. But a memory object depends on a living community. Once that community disappears, the object loses much of its voice. The evidence remains incomplete because the most important part of the system may have been spoken, performed, or taught through action. The stone remains, but the explanations that made it breathe are gone. Human societies have long used memory techniques that are not writing and can still preserve enormous complexity. Songs can carry roots. Stories can encode seasonal movement. Ritual journeys can bind people to places in exact order. Marks on objects can serve as reminders rather than full messages. Knots, carvings, painted signs, body ornaments, and repeated designs can help organize social and spatial knowledge. These examples do not prove exactly how the Abeyance stone was used, and scholars still debate its meaning, but they show that writing is not the only way human beings store information beyond the moment. In many settings, Memory is not weak because it is oral. It is trained. A surprising detail in many non-literate or partly literate traditions is how precisely geography can be remembered through narrative. A story may appear, to an outsider, to be about animals, ancestors, spirits, or danger, while also preserving the order of water sources, the character of terrain, the timing of travel, or the rules for moving through a place. Practical and symbolic meanings do not cancel each other, they strengthen each other. A route remembered only as instruction may fade. A route tied to story, danger, kinship, and identity can last far longer. The Paleolithic world is too distant to reconstruct in such detail, but the principle is important. Landscapes become memorable when they become meaningful. The people who knew abounds may have carried their geography in layered forms. There would be the knowledge of the feet, learned by walking. There would be the knowledge of the eyes, learned by watching animals and weather. There would be the knowledge of the hands, learned by making tools suited to particular places and prey. There would be the knowledge of the group, corrected by elders, tested by hunters, absorbed by children, and renewed when people return to the same roots. If an engraved stone joined that system, it may have served as a small hard knot in a larger net of memory. This makes the possible map less like an isolated invention, and more like a trace of a vanished information world. Modern people often imagine information as something separate from life, stored in devices or documents. For late Paleolithic groups, information is inseparable from survival. To know where animals pass is to know when food may come. To know a river crossing is to know whether a group can travel safely. To know the location of good stone is to know how weapons and tools can be repaired. To know shelter is to know how to endure weather. Memory is not decoration, it is infrastructure. The absence of writing also changes time. Written records can create long institutional memory, but oral and practical memory create another kind of continuity, tied to repetition and return. A place is remembered because people go back to it. A route survives because it is walked. A landmark remains meaningful because it enters stories told around fire and decisions made before travel. When groups stop returning, memory weakens. When climate changes animal movement. Old knowledge must be revised. When people die without passing on what they know, a landscape can become more dangerous for those who remain. No single explanation fully accounts for the marks on the Abont stone, but a memory object would make sense in such a world, where knowledge must be continually renewed or lost. The stone also stands near the beginning of a long human transformation. Later, writing will allow people to record laws, myths, accounts, royal boasts, letters, prayers, taxes, and maps with names attached. But writing will not replace memory. It will grow from older habits of marking, counting, remembering, and symbolizing. Before someone writes a word, someone must already understand that a mark can stand for something absent. A line can be a river. A notch can be a number. A sign can call back a sound, a place, an animal, a debt, a promise. The Abont's engraving, if it carries spatial meaning, belongs to that deep human preparation for written worlds, and yet it remains firmly before writing. That is its power. It shows, or may show, intelligence without inscription, geography without labels, memory without archive. It reminds us that history did not begin when people first pressed words into clay or inked symbols onto a surface. History, in the human sense, begins wherever experience is remembered and passed on. The stone from Abounts may be one of those rare places where a passing act of memory became durable by accident. The hand that cut the lines is gone. The voice that explained them is gone. The group that knew the routes is gone. But the idea remains faintly visible. A landscape can be carried, and a world without writing can still leave a map of what it knew. What the stone still withholds may matter as much as what it reveals. After all the careful looking, all the comparisons with rivers and slopes, all the attempts to understand the engraved lines as memory, route, hunting knowledge, or symbolic landscape, the object remains incomplete. It does not give back the voice of its maker. It does not tell us whether it was carved in one sitting or shaped across several moments. It does not explain whether the animals and lines belong to a single idea or to several layers of meaning placed on the same surface. It does not say whether it was used beside firelight, carried along a route, taught to a younger person, kept as a meaningful object, or left behind without ceremony when people moved on. The evidence remains incomplete, and that incompleteness is not a weakness at the edge of the story. It is the condition of reaching so far into time. The most tempting mistake would be to turn the stone into something cleaner than it is. A perfect prehistoric map would be easier to describe. It would show a river clearly, a mountain clearly, a route clearly, and the modern viewer could stand back with satisfaction, believing the mystery solved. But a bounce offers no such comfort. Its marks are dense, damaged, suggestive, and open to more than one reading. Some lines seem to point outward toward the surrounding terrain. Some may belong to animals, some may be symbolic, some may be marks whose meaning depended on a gesture, a spoken explanation, or a memory shared among people now lost. No single explanation fully accounts for every part of it, and perhaps no single explanation ever did. Objects can live complicated lives. A stone may begin as a surface for one image and later receive another. A line made to recall a stream may become part of a story. An animal figure may be added near a terrain mark because the animal belongs to that place, or because the place is remembered through the animal, or because the two meanings were never separate to begin with. Modern categories press hard against such things. Map, art, ritual, tool, teaching aid, memory object. Each term captures something and loses something. The stone may have rested in a world where those divisions were unnecessary. Its makers may not have asked what kind of object it was. They may have asked only whether it held what needed holding. This is why the mystery endures without needing exaggeration. The stone is not proof of an unknown civilization, not a relic of impossible knowledge, not a message from people who somehow stepped outside their time. Its power is quieter. It may show that late Paleolithic humans could represent known space through signs, combining landscape, animals, movement, and memory in a durable form. That possibility is fully human, fully plausible, and still astonishing. It tells us that the distance between their minds and ours is not a ladder from simple to complex, but a distance of circumstance. They lived with different tools, different pressures, different landscapes, and different ways of preserving knowledge. The mind doing the work was already human. And still, the stone keeps its final silence. It refuses to become a document. It does not allow modern people to possess the past completely. It permits approach, not conquest. Researchers can measure, photograph, compare, reconstruct, and argue. They can place the object in its late Magdalenian setting, examine its incisions, and ask whether its lines correspond to features around a bounce cave. They can say that the interpretation as a possible map is serious enough to matter, and disputed enough to require care. But they cannot restore the moment when the engraver's hand first touched the surface. They cannot recover the firelight, the weather outside, the human need that made the mark necessary. That loss is not empty. It leaves room for the real scale of time. Between the carving and the modern eye lie climate shifts, forest growth, changing rivers, vanished animal patterns, generations of people moving through the land, the rise of farming, the arrival of villages, kingdoms, roads, archives, machines, and screens. The stone survived all of that, not because it was grand, but because it was small and durable enough to be missed by destruction. A tiny object passed through the long violence of ordinary time. The world around it changed almost beyond recognition. Its makers disappeared into ancestry, sediment, and silence. Yet a few lines remained. Perhaps that is the most moving thing. The stone does not preserve a whole civilization. It preserves attention. It preserves the possibility that someone looked at a living terrain and understood its relationships deeply enough to mark them. It preserves a hint that a cave was not only shelter, that a river was not only water, that an animal was not only prey, that a route was not only movement. Each belonged to a network of meaning, and human beings stood inside that network, trying to remember enough to survive. The prehistoric map no one expected to find remains, in the end, both evidence and absence. It gives enough to challenge old assumptions, enough to suggest a mind arranging land into signs, enough to make the Paleolithic world feel close and alert, but it withholds the final key. That is why it stays alive as a mystery, not because it is unknowable in every sense, but because it reminds us that knowledge of the past is always partial. We receive fragments, and from fragments we build careful bridges. Some hold, some fail, some lead us only far enough to see the outline of what has vanished. A bounce leaves us with the small engraved surface and a much larger silence. The lines may be rivers, roots, mountains, animal places, memory marks, or a mixture of meanings that cannot now be separated. What survives in the record suggests intention, intelligence, and a relationship with land more complex than older stereotypes allowed. What does not survive is the living world that made the marks obvious. The stone can be studied, but it cannot be asked. It can be followed, but only so far. And at the edge of that distance, the ancient landscape withdraws, not erased entirely, but never fully returned. The story slows there, in the space between the stone and the lost world around it. The cave grows quiet again. The firelight that once may have moved across its walls has gone out for thousands of years. The people who knew the old crossings, who watched the water rise and listened for animals beyond the trees, have passed beyond names. Their routes are no longer walked in the same way. Their weather has changed. Their valleys have filled with other histories. Yet something of their attention remains, pressed into a surface small enough for the hand. That is the strange tenderness of deep time. It takes nearly everything, but not always everything. A bone point remains, a flake of stone remains, a trace of pigment remains, a line, cut with pressure by a person who could not imagine the modern world, remains. And from these small survivals, the past does not return whole, but it stirs. It suggests breath in a cold cave, feet on wet ground, eyes following a river, memory moving beyond the visible ridge. The possible map from a bounce does not need to surrender all its secrets to matter. Perhaps its greatest gift is the reminder that human beings have always lived by making worlds inside their minds. Before writing, before cities, before measured borders, they carried rivers in memory. They carried roots in stories. They carried danger, hunger, shelter, and hope in signs that could be spoken, traced, walked, or carved. They did not stand outside history. They were history. moving through a landscape that demanded everything from them. And now the stone rests under modern light, far from the hands that made it, still marked by a knowledge we can approach only gently. Its lines no longer guide a hunt. They no longer call a group toward water before evening. They no longer explain a route through cold hills. But they continue to do something quieter. They ask us to look more carefully at the old human world and to admit how much intelligence can vanish without vanishing completely. So the final image is not of a solved puzzle, but of a small stone in darkness, holding the faint shape of a place that time has changed. Outside, rivers keep moving, hills keep weathering, names come and go. The ancient path is gone, but the need to remember remains. Somewhere between the cave, the valley, and the engraved line, the first map is still waiting, not to be conquered, but to be listened to.